Elijah Thomas built his dream high in the Colorado mountains. A black gay man owning a ski resort, defying every expectation in a world that never made room for him. But when a powerful investor hurled a slur and broke his wrist in front of a crowd, the snow wasn't the only thing that cracked. What started as an insult became a threat to everything Elijah built. Behind the scenes, a network of corruption moved to bury him through pressure, silence, and intimidation. But Elijah didn't flinch. He documented, he planned. He fought through the system, not outside of it. This isn't just a story of survival, it's a story of justice, of dignity, of refusing to be erased. Would you have stayed calm under pressure? Would you have fought back the same way? Let us know in the comments, and if you believe in standing your ground, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share Elijah's story. The early morning snow hadn't let up since dawn, blanketing the peaks of Cedar Ridge in powder so fresh it looked untouched by time. Elijah Thomas stood behind the front desk of his ski lodge, jacket unzipped, clipboard under one arm, and the faint smell of espresso clinging to his sleeves. His usual staffer had called in sick, so he took the shift without complaint. That was Elijah. Owner of the resort, yes, but above all, a worker. Cedar Ridge was his life's work. He bought it nearly 10 years ago when it was little more than a forgotten trail and a crumbling lodge. What he turned it into, sleek cabins, sustainable lifts, modern safety equipment, was a miracle powered by pure will and 1,000 small sacrifices. He didn't just run the place, he lived it. By mid-morning, the lobby had filled with skiers stomping snow off boots and children dragging poles too long for them. The fireplace crackled. The front desk line moved fast. Elijah kept it that way. No one would say the black man who owned a ski resort wasn't efficient. A family stepped up next. The dad fumbled his reservation. The mom apologized. Elijah smiled. "No problem at all. We've got you set for a cabin upgrade on us. Looks like our system hiccuped." The woman looked surprised. "Really, that's wow, thank you." He handed them their keys, a map, and a coupon for 2 free hot chocolates. "We take care of our guests," he said, already turning to the next group. Outside, the snow kept falling in slow, lazy waves. Elijah stepped out onto the balcony for a quick breath of the cold. That's when he saw it. A man in a blood-orange jacket was screaming at a teenage snowboarder near the base of the lift. The boy looked stunned, clutching his helmet to his chest. Elijah couldn't hear every word over the wind, but he caught enough to move. "Hey," Elijah called, jogging down the steps in boots. "Everything all right here?" The man turned, white mid-50s, face red with rage, expensive goggles pushed to his forehead, his mouth twisted. "You the guy in charge here?" "Yes," Elijah said evenly. "Elijah Thomas, I own Cedar Ridge, what's going on?" "This little punk cut me off on the run," the man snapped. "Nearly broke my leg." The boy, maybe 16, wide-eyed, looked between them. "I didn't mean to, sir. He turned real fast and I couldn't." "He's fine," Elijah said. "No one's hurt, let's take a breath." The man narrowed his eyes. "You know what? I don't need a lecture from some F." Time slowed, the word came out loud and clear. It cut through the snowfall, through the crowd, through Elijah's chest. Gasps fluttered from nearby skiers. A woman holding a child stepped back. A man lowered his phone from a selfie and started recording without saying a word. Elijah didn't move. "Excuse me," he said calmly, voice low, deliberate. "I said I'm not taking orders from some F," the man spat again, louder this time, puffed up by his own performance. "You people think you can buy a resort and start bossing folks around." Elijah stared at him for a long moment, then he looked to the teenager who was frozen in place. "You all right?" he asked the boy. The kid nodded, unsure. Elijah took out his phone and tapped record. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to leave the property immediately. This is a family resort, you're being filmed, security is on its way." The man laughed, bitter and sharp. "You think I'm scared of you? I could buy this whole damn mountain. You've got no idea who I am." "I don't need to know who you are," Elijah replied, "but you're not welcome here." The man stepped forward, jabbing a finger. Elijah didn't flinch. Cameras kept rolling, voices whispered. Just then Patrick from security jogged up, puffing from the hike down the stairs. "Everything okay?" he asked. "This man's being escorted off the property," Elijah said. The man turned and swung his ski pole, not hard but enough to make contact. It cracked across Elijah's forearm before Patrick grabbed him. Pain shot up Elijah's arm, but he didn't stumble, he didn't scream. He barely moved. Patrick shoved the man back. "Are you kidding me?" "Get your hands off me," the man yelled. "I'll sue you and this whole place." "We have it all on video," Elijah said, breathing through the pain. "Call EMTs and the sheriff." The man paced like a caged animal, muttering to himself. Guests had formed a wide circle, most pretending not to stare. Phones were still up. Elijah sat on a bench nearby, cradling his arm. Patrick stood beside him. "Think it's broken?" Patrick asked. "Maybe," Elijah said. "It's bad, hurts." "Want me to hit the panic button, lock the lodge?" No, Elijah said, just get him off the mountain. When the ambulance pulled in 15 minutes later, the man was still yelling at Patrick at the crowd at the snow. EMTs wrapped Elijah's wrist in a brace. The sheriff's deputy filled out a report half-heartedly. Reed Whitaker, the man called himself, said he was a member of some mountain association, said he had connections. I bet you'll be real sorry when this comes around, Reed muttered before being guided away. Elijah didn't respond. He just handed his phone to the deputy, showing the video. He got a copy emailed to himself. He asked 3 witnesses for statements and made sure Patrick had logged the incident in the digital security journal. By noon, Reed was gone and the mountain was quiet again. Elijah sat alone in the back office, hand throbbing, eyes fixed on the video replay. The words rang out again, clear, unedited, the swing, the slur, the smirk. He saved the file to 3 drives, sent it to his lawyer, then he leaned back and closed his eyes. He knew what came next, and he'd be ready. The mountain was calm the next morning, a low fog curling at the base of the slopes like breath in cold air. The wind had quieted overnight, but the tension that clung to Cedar Ridge hadn't lifted. Not for Elijah. He sat at his office desk, left wrist now in a rigid brace, fingers peeking out stiff and tender. His phone buzzed with emails, voicemails, polite check-ins from regular guests, and a few angry messages from unknown numbers. The video had started to circulate, not viral yet, but enough that people were talking. A post on a local ski forum had already called it the slur heard across the snow. But Elijah wasn't worried about the video. He was worried about the man in it, Reed Whitaker. The name hadn't meant anything to him yesterday, but now it rang loud and ugly in his inbox. The sheriff's deputy had mentioned Reed was connected to something called the Mountain Valley Association. A quick online search brought it into focus, an informal but wealthy collective of land developers, investors, and resort owners, mostly based out of Colorado and Texas. Their public mission was promoting modernization and consolidation of mountain recreation. Their real mission, Elijah suspected, was monopoly. Cedar Ridge had been on their radar for 2 years. Elijah had received offers to sell, all rejected. The last one was more aggressive. It came with a veiled threat, a letter warning about water use restrictions, zoning pressure, and increased liability in the event of injury. Elijah had forwarded it to his lawyer at the time. Nothing came of it, until now. There was a knock on his office door. It was Tessa, the lodge manager. She looked tense, hands folded. Guy at the cafe says Reed showed up at Mountain County Hall this morning, she said. Said he was meeting with a commissioner. Elijah looked up. You sure? That's what Jenna heard. Her cousin works front desk over there. Elijah exhaled. All right, thanks. As soon as she left, he opened a folder on his desk. Inside were the letters from the Mountain Valley Association. The one from last year mentioned Reed by name. Another had a signature he hadn't recognized at the time, L. McCrae, zoning chair, Mountain County. That same McCrae had recently pushed a land access restriction that would make it harder for independent resorts to expand. Elijah hadn't connected the dots before. He did now. His phone buzzed again, unknown number. He let it ring out. Then again, a minute later, he sighed and picked up. Elijah Thomas speaking. Mr. Thomas, a gruff voice answered, this is Reed Whitaker. Elijah didn't say anything. I thought I'd save you some time, Reed continued. You're gonna want to drop that complaint. Why would I do that? Elijah asked, his voice low. Because I know the way this game plays, Reed said. You make noise, I make calls, that's how it goes. I have you on video attacking me. You think anyone going to excuse that? I don't need them to excuse it, Reed said. I just need them to bury it. I've been doing business in these mountains for 20 years. Your new money, you don't understand the landscape. Elijah let the silence hang. You're bluffing, he said finally. I'm offering you a solution, Reed replied. You sell, clean, profitable, walk away, wrist in a cast but your name intact, or you go the other way and I'll see what the water board thinks about your snow-making usage. See what the county says about the lodge's fire safety plans. See what happens when inspections start showing up out of nowhere. I'll take my chances, Elijah said. We're done here. He ended the call and dropped the phone on the desk. This wasn't about a fight on a mountain anymore. It was about power, territory, ownership. Elijah had thought it was just another bigot blowing smoke. Now he knew it was something deeper, something calculated. He went to his email and opened a draft to his lawyer, attaching the call transcript from the voice recorder app he kept running during tense conversations. He noted the date and time. He labeled it plainly, threatening call from Reed Whitaker, 10:42 a.m. Then he sat back and stared out the window. Below, the ski lifts ran as usual. Children laughed. The slopes carved with happy lines, but Elijah felt something shifting beneath it all. Later that afternoon, he walked the grounds, nodding to staff and helping guests where he could. The brace on his wrist drew looks. No one asked, but they didn't have to. At the base lodge near the cafe, a waitress named Ava called him over quietly. I heard about what happened, she said. Elijah raised an eyebrow. Word travels fast. She glanced around. I saw the video, but I also know that guy. Elaborate. Ava leaned in. Reed, he's been coming here for years. A couple times he made comments, racist stuff, homophobic. I didn't say anything because, she trailed off. Well, you know. Elijah nodded. You'd be willing to make a statement. She looked nervous. Will it help? Yes, a lot. Then yeah, she said, I'll do it. Elijah thanked her, told her to speak to the head of guest services for documentation. As he walked away, his phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Patrick, his head of security. Checked lift cam footage from yesterday, got angle of Reed hitting you. Full view, high raise, want me to pull it. Elijah typed back, yes, archive it and send it to my work email. Evidence, eyewitness, pattern. He was building something, not just a case, but a story that couldn't be denied. He returned to his office just as the sun began to dip behind the western ridge. The snow outside turned golden, lighting the pine trees like embers frozen in time. He sat at his desk, opened his laptop, and began organizing every piece. Video from the base, audio from the call, letters from the association, names, dates, links. And then he started to write, not a press release. Not a blog post, but a record. If they were going to try and crush him under pressure, they were going to find out how much weight he could carry. By Monday morning, Cedar Ridge looked no different. Skiers still lined up for lift passes, kids still raced to snow schools, and the espresso machine in the cafe still hissed and steamed like clockwork. But behind the lodge's polished wood walls and warm fires, something colder had settled in. Elijah arrived early, long before the sun had fully burned through the mountain haze. His wrist ached with every movement, but he didn't complain. He had work to do, and most of it would be done quietly. He stepped into the main office, nodded to Tessa, and closed the door behind him. The laptop was already open, the folder titled Whitaker expanding each time he added something new: video clips, timestamped security logs, transcripts of threatening messages, copies of zoning requests, and a list of other small resorts that had recently been bought out or shuttered under suspicious pressure. Elijah didn't have to wonder whether this would escalate. He already knew it would. That call from Reed hadn't been a bluff. It had been a warning shot. Just after 10, the lodge's front desk buzzed. Tessa's voice came through the intercom, soft but alert. Elijah, someone's here to see you. Who? Says his name's Luke Kelly, with Mountain Valley Association. Elijah didn't respond right away. Send him in, he said after a pause. A few moments later, the door opened and a man in his late 30s stepped in. Tall, athletic build, tailored coat, the kind of polished confidence that came from boardrooms, not snow. He extended a hand. Elijah Thomas, pleasure to finally meet you in person. Elijah didn't take the hand. He simply gestured toward the chair opposite his desk. Luke sat down, unfazed. I assume you know why I'm here, Luke said. Elijah didn't answer. Luke continued. Reed mentioned there was an unfortunate incident. Emotions ran high. People say things in the heat of the moment. Elijah raised an eyebrow. He broke my wrist. Luke smiled slightly, as if that detail were inconvenient more than concerning. No one here is defending his behavior. You have our full apology for the misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. Luke shifted in his seat. Look, Reed's old school. He says what he says. Sometimes it's not pretty, but this doesn't need to get messy. We're prepared to make this right. How? A formal apology, a donation to the resort, an agreement to step back from all future engagements here, and in return you drop the complaint. Elijah leaned forward slightly. You're not just here because of Reed. You're here because I didn't sell. Luke paused. No one wants a war, Elijah. I'm not starting one. But you're fueling one, and I think you know that. This place, Cedar Ridge, it's beautiful, but it's not invincible. Regulations can change, utilities get reviewed, access roads close for repairs. You trying to scare me? Luke smiled again, just a little too smooth. I'm trying to offer you a way out. I'm not looking for a way out, Elijah said. I'm building something, that's the difference between us. Luke stood, he adjusted his collar, glanced once around the office, then back at Elijah. Well, I hope you reconsider, because if you keep this up, you're going to make a lot of powerful people very uncomfortable. Elijah stood too. Good, maybe they need to be. Luke walked out without another word. After he left, Elijah took a moment. He stood by the window, looking out at the mountain that had become more than land to him. It was legacy, community, a place where people like him, black, queer, underestimated, could find air that didn't choke them. He picked up his phone and called someone he hadn't spoken to in a long time. Jules, he said when the voice answered. Elijah, is everything all right? Not really, I need a favor, you still doing freelance? Jules had been a producer at a major media outlet before going independent. She once offered to help with a documentary on black entrepreneurs in unlikely industries. He hadn't taken her up on it until now. He explained everything, read the assault, the video, the pressure from Mountain Valley. Jules didn't interrupt once. When he finished, there was a pause. Send me everything, she said. I'll be there by Thursday, this needs sunlight. That night the wind picked up again. A storm rolled in, light at first, then heavier as the hours passed. Elijah walked the perimeter of the resort, checking in with staff, helping a stranded guest push a rental car free of the lot. No one would guess the storm inside him matched the one coming down from the peaks. Back in his office, he sorted through files again. One document stood out now, something small he hadn't thought much about before. It was an email from last year, an equipment supplier canceling a contract unexpectedly, citing unexplained risk factors. He remembered calling them, getting vague answers, then scrambling to replace the order. At the time, it felt like bad luck. Now he wondered who had made a call behind his back. He flagged it, added it to the file. Then he opened a new one, pattern. Because that's what this was. A pattern, not just read, not just this one incident. It was a method, pressure, silence, displacement. And Elijah wasn't going to let it happen again. Just before midnight, he got a message from Patrick. The footage from the lift cams had been archived and backed up on multiple drives. The angle was perfect. Clean, unbroken. You could see Reed swing, see the impact, see the moment Elijah stepped back and didn't retaliate. That was power, too, not reacting. Not giving them the scene they wanted. Elijah sat alone, watching the snow fall until the mountain lights flickered in the storm and the last lift slowed to a stop. Outside, the night deepened, but inside, the evidence grew, and Elijah Thomas stayed calm. The storm wasn't coming anymore. It had already arrived. The storm passed by morning, but it left behind a silence that felt different than usual. The mountain was covered in a thick, untouched blanket of snow, and for a few hours, Cedar Ridge looked like a postcard, pure calm, untouched. Elijah stood on the balcony outside the lodge's upper floor, sipping coffee with his good hand, his wrists still strapped tight beneath the brace. His breath made clouds in the air, but his thoughts were heavy. It had only been 3 days since the incident, and already the lines were forming, quiet ones, hidden behind company emails and cold greetings. Some of his regular suppliers had gone silent. The county building inspector sent a routine inquiry asking for updated blueprints, and 3 ski instructors reported a man walking around the lower lots asking about ownership changes. He hadn't worn a badge or identified himself. Elijah knew what this was, a tightening, the kind you feel before a flood. He turned back inside and sat at his desk, ready to keep working through the documents when Tessa stepped in without knocking. She held an envelope in one hand and a strange look on her face. "This just got dropped off," she said. "No return name, but it came with this." She handed him a small white business card. Elijah read it. Michael Bannister. Former U.S. Senator. Aspen, Colorado. He opened the envelope. Inside was a short, handwritten note. "Mr. Thomas, I witnessed what happened on Saturday. You held your ground with dignity, and that matters more than you know. I'd like to speak with you if you're willing. I'll be skiing this afternoon at your ridge. You'll recognize me. Blue jacket, gray beard, come find me." And Elijah read it twice before setting it down. He didn't know much about Michael Bannister, other than that he'd served 2 terms and made headlines once for calling out land developers over environmental fraud. A long-retired political heavyweight who apparently spent his winters skiing. At 2 o'clock, Elijah rode the lift halfway up the ridge and spotted him exactly where the note had promised, a tall man with a gray beard and calm eyes standing near the overlook with his skis dug into the snow and a thermos in hand. Bannister waved him over like they'd met before. "You move slower with that wrist," he said, smiling. Elijah approached, cautious but curious. "I appreciate the note." "I appreciate the composure," Bannister replied. "These mountains have seen their fair share of screaming matches, not many handled like yours." Elijah nodded but didn't speak. "I know who Reed Whittaker is," the senator continued. "Knew his father actually, same entitlement, same stink of ownership." "You said you witnessed it." Bannister's gaze hardened. "Every word, and I know what that kind of slur sounds like when it's aimed to wound. I grew up in Georgia, I've seen enough of it to know. I filed the report, I've got the footage, and I'm building the rest." Bannister took a sip from the thermos and looked back at the slope. "They'll bury it if they can, you know that." "I do." "They'll pull strings, squeeze your vendors, play quiet games in County Hall." He paused. "That's their blueprint." "I'm not selling." "I know. That's why I reached out." They stood in silence for a moment, the snow falling soft and slow around them. "I want to help," Bannister said. "There's a network. People like me, retired, well-connected, not scared of shaking trees. I've called 2 lawyers already who specialize in discriminatory land pressure cases. They'll talk to you at no cost. Elijah looked at him carefully. Why me? Because you're standing exactly where they didn't want you to, and because Cedar Ridge is worth protecting. Elijah nodded. All right, let's talk. They spent the next half hour at the mountaintop cafe, heads low, voices quieter. Bannister laid out what he'd seen before. Other resort owners pushed out, permits revoked without explanation, land rezoned and sold off overnight. The same association had been involved in at least 3 cases under different names. The thread was thin but real. By the time Elijah rode back down the lift, he had names, numbers, case files, and a new folder to add to the growing archive. When he got back to the lodge, Ava was waiting near the front desk. She held a folder of her own. I wrote down everything I could remember, she said. Dates, what he said, where we were if someone else was there. He opened it, 4 pages, typed, signed at the bottom. I also talked to Nate in rentals, she added. He said Reed made a joke once about gays not belonging in snow, crude stuff. He didn't say anything then, but he will now. Elijah placed a hand on her shoulder. Thank you. That night, Jules arrived. She stepped into the lodge lobby wearing a puffy red coat and lugging a rolling camera case behind her. Elijah met her at the entrance and she hugged him before he could even speak. I've been watching the clips, she said. You were right to start this, but we have to be smart. The goal isn't just exposure, it's impact. I know. They worked late, sifting through every piece. Jules began drawing a timeline, Reed's presence in Mountain Valley Association, his known business interests, the zoning board's patterns. Each name came with a connection, each document layered on top of the last until the weight of it all felt undeniable. By midnight, they had a pitch for a short-form piece, The Man Who Owns the Mountain and the Ones Who Tried to Take It. Jules would run it past a few editors. No promises, but interest was already building. Before she left to check in at her hotel, she turned back and asked, You sure you're ready for what happens next? Elijah looked around the room, at the windows, the slopes just visible in the dark. I didn't build this place to hand it over. By the end of the week, the storm had become more than weather. The first article broke late Thursday night, just a 2-minute segment published quietly online by a regional news affiliate. It featured grainy lift cam footage of the altercation, blurred faces, and a reporter's cautious voice explaining that a local resort owner may have been the target of a racially and sexually charged assault. No names, no lawsuits yet, but the video was unmistakable. Elijah watched it play on his laptop, sitting in the lodge's back office in the quiet hours after closing. The camera showed the exact moment Reed's ski pole came down across his arm, the gasp from the crowd, his body recoiling, the way he never raised his voice, the way he just stood there. By morning, the clip had jumped to 3 other outlets. Jules hadn't even sent in her full piece yet. This was just the tremor before the quake. Patrick knocked softly and stepped inside, holding his phone out. Got something you'll want to see. Elijah took the phone and pressed play. It was a drone video, long and steady, hovering above the backlot of the county zoning office. 2 men walked across the parking lot, Reed and a shorter man in a tan coat that Elijah didn't recognize. They were shaking hands beside a black SUV, one of them passing what looked like a rolled document. There was no audio, but the body language was clear. Where'd this come from? Anonymous tip, Patrick said. No sender ID, just dropped into the lodge's tip line overnight. Elijah nodded slowly and handed the phone back. Archive it and put it in the evidence file. Later that day, Ava came into the office carrying a small stack of papers. She looked nervous, the kind of nervous that comes from knowing your name is about to be added to something permanent. I talked to the others, she said. Nate and Jen from the cafe too. They've all had run-ins with Reed, some worse than mine. They'll sign affidavits if needed. Even if it gets public, Elijah asked. Ava hesitated, then nodded. We talked about it, we're not hiding anymore. Elijah took the stack and slid it into a folder labeled Witness Statements. His hands were steady, even if everything around him was starting to shift faster than he could track. The next few days blurred together. Bannister called again, passing on the name of a civil rights attorney in Denver who had worked on land intimidation cases before. Elijah booked the call. The lawyer, sharp, blunt, and completely unfazed, said she'd take it on contingency and begin background research immediately. Then came the records request. Patrick walked in mid-afternoon with a printout from the zoning board's archives. You're gonna want to sit down. Elijah read it carefully. It was dry at first, just names, vote counts, permit rejections. Then he spotted it. The zoning denial for Ridgeline Lodge, a black-owned ski business 3 towns over, rejected under environmental conflict guidelines last year. A month after that, it sold to a Mountain Valley Shell Corporation for a fraction of its appraised value. There were three more like it, all small, all minority-owned, all rejected under vague terms. All snapped up within 3 to 6 months of denial. Elijah circled the dates in red and set the printout aside. This wasn't a story about one man calling him a slur, this was something else. That night he sat down with Jules and read through her first full draft. It was strong, balanced, factual, steady in tone, but it didn't flinch. She laid out the timeline, the connection between Mountain Valley and the land board, the financial trail, the threats. She interviewed Ava anonymously. She cited the drone footage, the video from the incident, the history. Elijah asked her to hold it back one more day. He had a few calls to make first. The next morning, he called Alan Chu. Alan was the quiet type, the kind of man who only spoke when there was something worth saying. He ran a small resort in Montana and had once spoken at a conference about building community-first recreation. Elijah remembered the line, "These hills aren't just for the rich and bored. They belong to everyone with boots." Alan picked up on the third ring. Elijah heard some noise. "What's going on? I need your help. I'm listening." By the end of the call, Alan had agreed to pass Elijah's information to a group of owners who had, over the years, formed a quiet alliance of sorts. They didn't advertise it, but they shared notes, especially when someone tried to price them out or choke their operations. "I think you've uncovered something we've all been living with," Alan said. "We just didn't have the receipts." "I've got them," Elijah said. "I'm not stopping." Later that afternoon, a package arrived by courier. No return address again. Inside was a flash drive, plain and unmarked. Elijah plugged it into a secure laptop in his office and opened the contents slowly. It was a PDF, titled, Internal Strategy MVA Acquisition Flowchart 2021. He clicked it open. It read like a war plan. First, pressure through zoning delays. Then cut off supply chains, equipment rentals, gear, third-party food vendors. After that, whisper campaigns about insurance liability. All of it soft, deniable, never direct, just enough to make the target feel the water rising around their ankles before the lifeboat came in the form of a buyout. And listed at the bottom, 5 target properties. Cedar Ridge was third on the list. Elijah leaned back in his chair, heart still, hand still, but his mind raced. He printed 3 copies and stored the original in encrypted cloud folders. 1 copy went to his lawyer. 1 went to Jules, the last stayed with him. By sunset, the mountain outside was glowing pink and gold. He stood at the edge of the balcony again, watching skiers make their last lazy descent before night skiing began. From here, the world looked untouched, clean, beautiful, but Elijah knew better now. Beneath the powder, rot had spread, and he wasn't covering it up. He was going to dig it out, every root, every tendril, every name. The hearing wasn't flashy. It wasn't on television or broadcast online. No cameras, no protesters, no reporters crowding the steps. Just a modest municipal building, beige walls, worn carpet, the air inside dry and heavy with recycled heat. But to Elijah, it felt like standing in the center of something that could change everything. It had taken weeks to get there. Weeks of files, statements, whispered calls, cold shoulders, coded threats. Reed had gone silent publicly, but Elijah knew silence didn't mean surrender, it meant calculation. Somewhere behind a wall of lawyers, the man was planning his response, and it would be ugly. Still, Elijah came prepared. He wore a dark navy coat, clean and pressed. No tie, no dramatic entrance, just steady steps, a clear mind, and a brace still wrapped around his wrist, even if the bone beneath had mostly healed. He kept it on anyway, not for sympathy, but for truth. It was part of the story. A story the committee would hear today. The courtroom wasn't a courtroom at all, just a long rectangular space with fold-out chairs and a single wooden table for speakers. A raised platform held 5 members of the Mountain County Zoning Oversight Committee, none of whom looked pleased to be there. But they had no choice now. A formal complaint had been filed, backed by legal counsel and multiple sworn affidavits. They had to respond. Elijah sat in the front row. Beside him, Jules kept a hand on her notepad. His lawyer, Cassandra Ortiz, whispered updates now and then, but Elijah barely heard them. He was focused on the chair across the room, the one that sat empty until the door opened and Reed Whitaker walked in. Reed didn't look rattled. He didn't stumble or flinch. He walked like he still owned the room, like the air bent a little to make space for him. Expensive gray jacket, polished boots. Eyes locked straight ahead. He nodded once to the committee as if greeting old friends. He sat without looking at Elijah. The chairwoman of the committee, a sharp-featured woman with streaks of gray in her hair, banged the gavel once and called the hearing to order. This is a public review of complaint number 2025-14, filed by Elijah Thomas against Reed Whitaker and affiliated entities, concerning alleged discriminatory behavior and undue business interference within the jurisdiction of Mountain County. Both parties will have time to present statements and evidence. Witnesses will be called. This session is now in motion. Reed's lawyer went first. A man with a practiced voice and a careful rhythm, he began by framing Reed's behavior as a regrettable personal dispute blown out of proportion by media sensationalism. He said the resort incident was misunderstood, and Reed had already offered a gesture of apology. Elijah watched calm, he didn't move. Didn't interrupt. He let the performance roll on, every word expected. Then the lawyer pivoted. There is no evidence Mr. Whitaker ever exerted unlawful pressure on Mr. Thomas's business. There are no direct communications, no threats made in writing. My client, a respected investor and longtime winter sports patron, categorically denies all allegations of zoning manipulation or hostile business interference. When it was Elijah's turn, he stood slowly and walked to the single table set for testimony. He didn't clear his throat or shuffle his notes, he just started talking. I've owned Cedar Ridge for nearly a decade. I've paid every tax, followed every rule, passed every inspection. I've hosted thousands of guests, families, veterans, students, all kinds of people who came to the mountain for peace. I've never had a serious complaint against my business, until Reed Whitaker arrived. He spoke plainly. He described the morning of the incident, the slur, the swing of the ski pole, the way Reed had laughed like it didn't matter. He played the clip. The room was quiet as the audio rang out. The silence afterward was heavier than the sound itself. Then he explained the fallout, the letters, the pressure, the zoning anomalies, the lost contracts, the drone footage. He held up the internal memo, the flowchart of acquisition tactics, and let the committee look at it. He didn't dramatize it. He didn't embellish. He simply handed over the truth and stepped back. The chairwoman nodded. Thank you, Mr. Thomas. They called Ava next. She sat nervously but held her ground. She recounted what she heard Reed say to her and others, the casual insults, the way he treated staff like they were beneath him. She didn't cry. She didn't try to sound rehearsed. She just told the truth. Then came Nate from rentals, then Jen from the cafe. Then a former member of the zoning board who, under subpoena, admitted that yes, Reed had once suggested that Cedar Ridge wasn't viable long-term and that someone with deeper pockets might better serve the community. That statement alone made two committee members sit upright. Finally, Michael Bannister took the stand. The former senator walked to the table with a slow, steady gait. He wasn't there as a politician, he was there as a witness. I saw the whole thing, he said. And I've been around long enough to know exactly what I saw. Tailed Reed's behavior. He confirmed that Elijah never raised his voice, never retaliated. He said he'd seen Reed's kind before, entitled men with access protected by familiarity and fear. The last witness was Jules. She testified not as a journalist but as a documentarian. She described her investigation into Mountain Valley's acquisitions, the similar patterns in other towns, and the voices that had gone silent after their properties changed hands. She offered names, records, context. The chairwoman asked questions. Jules answered them all without hesitation. When the final testimony ended, the room sat still. Reed shifted in his chair, leaned over to whisper something to his lawyer. The committee recessed for deliberation. Elijah stepped outside into the crisp air, lungs pulling deep. He didn't feel victory, not yet. He felt weight. 30 minutes passed before the doors reopened. The committee returned to their seats. The chairwoman read from a prepared statement. After reviewing the submitted evidence, live testimony, and documentation, the Mountain County Zoning Oversight Committee finds sufficient cause to recommend formal censure against Reed Whitaker and the Mountain Valley Association, pending further state-level investigation. Effective immediately, all business dealings with the county involving the above-named entities are suspended. We will forward all relevant findings to the State Attorney General's office for consideration of civil penalties. A ripple passed through the room. Reed didn't speak. He stood jaw tight, face pale, and walked out with his lawyer in tow. Elijah didn't move for a moment, not until Jules touched his arm and nodded toward the back of the room. Staff from the lodge had come, Ava, Natejen, even some guests. They clapped softly, quietly, but enough to fill the air. He turned back to the committee, and he thanked them. Outside, the sky had gone gold again. And for the first time in weeks, the mountain felt like it was breathing with him. Winter loosened its grip slowly that year. The storm stretched longer than usual, and the snow on the ridge held well into April. But something had shifted beneath the surface. Not just the season, but the current that ran through the valley, the way people looked at the lodge, the way they looked at Elijah. The hearing had ended, but the story didn't. Word spread in ripples. First the local news, then a couple of ski publications, then a national morning show that briefly featured a headline on the ski resort owner who stood his ground. Jules' piece dropped 2 days later, crisp and balanced and relentless in its clarity. It didn't just show what had happened, it mapped the entire operation Reed had been part of. The shell companies, the zoning pressure, the hostile acquisitions. Cedar Ridge became the centerpiece of something larger than just a fight for a mountain. It became the story of someone who didn't fold. Reed Whitaker vanished from the headlines just as fast. His company issued a carefully worded statement, but the damage was done. The footage was too clear. the testimony too precise. One by one, the board members tied to the Mountain Valley Association began stepping down. A formal investigation was launched by the state. Fines came next. Then lawsuits from former business owners who'd never thought they had a case until now. Elijah didn't attend any of those proceedings. He had no interest in revenge or watching men squirm. His energy went elsewhere, back to the mountain, back to the people who had stayed by his side. By late spring, the lodge buzzed with quiet restoration. Not rebuilding, the bones had never been broken, just tending to what had been shaken. Ava was promoted to director of guest services. Nate joined the operations team full-time. Jin took over food and beverage. Elijah didn't offer titles as rewards. He offered them because he trusted these people to protect what they'd helped him hold on to. Jules kept coming back, sometimes with a camera crew, sometimes just with her notebook and a smile. She said the follow-up piece would focus on how the community came together, how ordinary workers in a snowy lodge helped stop a powerful network of land thieves. Elijah didn't argue. He just reminded her to spell everyone's names right. Michael Bannister visited once in May, just after the last snow melt. He brought a leather-bound copy of the state Senate's proposed Small Business Equity Act, legislation he'd quietly helped draft using Cedar Ridge as a case study. It included new protections for independently owned seasonal businesses, new transparency requirements for zoning decisions, and penalties for covert land banking. Elijah flipped through it slowly. He nodded once. "It's a start," he said. Bannister smiled. "That's all anything ever is." One warm morning, Elijah stood alone on the highest ridge of the mountain. No skis, no gear, just boots in the wet dirt and the wind in his coat. Below, the valley spread wide, the tree line stretching like a seam across the earth. He could see the roofs of the cabins, the old maintenance shed he had refused to tear down, the lift towers that groaned through winter and now stood quiet, waiting for next year. He wasn't thinking about Reed. He wasn't thinking about hearings or evidence folders or threats left on voicemail. He was thinking about what it meant to belong somewhere. Really belong, not because a deed said so, not because a check cleared, but because when someone tried to take it from you, you held on anyway. He walked down to the lodge where a surprise waited in the main lobby. His sister had flown in from New York with her daughter, Leela, who was now tugging at the laces of borrowed snow boots 2 sizes too big. The girl grinned up at him, arms already outstretched. "You promised to teach me this year," she said. "I did," Elijah said, kneeling. "But I thought you wanted to wait until you were taller than the skis." "I am now," she insisted, standing proudly next to them. Her head came up just past the tips. He laughed, "Close enough." They spent the afternoon on the bunny hill, the slope soft and forgiving, the sun warming the edges of every glide. Elijah held her arms as she wobbled forward. She fell 3 times in the first minute, but by the 4th she was upright, determined. The same way he remembered learning years ago, long before owning a resort had ever entered his mind. Back when skiing had just meant movement, joy, wind and breath and silence. Leela didn't ask about the brace on his arm, even though he still wore it sometimes. It was more habit than need now. She didn't ask why people on the hill kept pointing or why someone stopped him near the lift to shake his hand and thank him. She just laughed when he helped her down the slope, boots knocking against the snow. That evening they lit the fire pit behind the lodge. Staff and a few guests gathered, drinking cider and telling stories about the season. Ava brought out marshmallows. Nate played a beat-up guitar that had survived 4 winters in storage. Elijah sat beside his niece, blanket wrapped around their shoulders. He watched the faces flickering in the firelight. He heard the easy laughter, the safe kind. He looked out across the land he'd fought for, not just the property lines, but the right to be there wholly, openly, without apology. A message came through on his phone, a photo from Jules. It showed a screen at a film festival. The title card read, "The Mountain Doesn't Bow." Below it, a still frame of him standing outside the courthouse, face steady, eyes forward. He set the phone down. The mountain didn't bow. It didn't fold. It didn't shake at its core. And neither had he. As the fire crackled and the stars began to emerge one by one, Elijah Thomas leaned back and let the warmth settle around him. Not victory, not pride, just peace. The kind that comes when the fight is over and you're still standing where you were never supposed to be.